Happy Wednesday, dearest friends. Right now I'm walking on a trail in Kentucky trying to find a good place to record my vlog. We'll see what I find. Not a bad backdrop. Maybe I'll use this. From this angle it just looks like a pile of sticks. But I'm comfortable here. Is this any better? I don't really think so. Alright, I give up. I'm doing it right here. Alright, so today I just want to share a simple short story that I wrote. Right now it's an untitled story, and let's begin. Life sucks. That's a bad motto for life, and truth be told, it wasn't Jimmy's official motto. But Jimmy told himself so often that life sucked that it might as well have been his life motto. He thought it from the moment he got up in the morning to the moment he went to bed. But right now Jimmy was sleeping. It was a brief moment of respite from his endless torment, and Jimmy relished it. In his dream, Jimmy was hiding in a closet. It really wasn't a pleasant dream. In fact, it was a nightmare. Somewhere down the hallway and around the corner was a monster. Jimmy wasn't sure what the monster looked like, whether it had horns or smelled like rotting flesh. He knew it was there and that it was looking for him. And so Jimmy hid in the closet, waiting and listening. There was a thin slip of yellow light that cut in under the door, as well as a gentle glow along the vertical line between the door and the doorway. Those lights made everything in the closet darker in contrast, so that Jimmy couldn't see anything. That was okay. He didn't need to see anything right now. He was listening. His ear was pressed against the rough oak of the door, and he wondered what kind of sounds the monster would make. Suspense sat heavy in his gut, reaching up, grabbing his lungs. It held his lungs with a ghostly iron grip that restricted breathing, and there was that paralyzing feeling of helplessness that Jimmy was so used to. Yet somehow in the middle of the suspense and the paralysis, Jimmy had a thought. Yes, this is good, he thought. I'm scared enough that I won't think about anything else. He smiled for a second, but then dismissed the thought and pressed his ear harder against the door. He had to focus on the monster now. It was quiet. Where was the monster? There was a monster, right? This would be a much less gripping nightmare if there wasn't a monster. Jimmy listened harder and began to think of all of his favorite monsters from different nightmares. There was that one with the humongous mouth. The lips looked like they were rotting, and saliva escaped from them even when his mouth was closed, drooling across his face. And his bloodshot eyes were under his mouth, repeatedly drenched in the drooling saliva. Then there was the one that distorted physics. The monster crawled with his chin pressed to the ground. His lower jaw extended 2 yards in front of the rest of his face, his gaping mouth becoming a carpet for the floor. The cavity of his mouth extended further down than the floor level, thus breaking physics. It was a hole in the floor that crawled. There was something about mouths for Jimmy. Still no noise, though. This was a problem. Jimmy couldn't take it. He needed to know if there was a monster. He counted 1, 2, and then on 3 he pushed the door open and peeked down the hall. Yes, there was a monster. And no, it wouldn't make a sound. It seemed to be half made out of mist. There was a cloud on the floor, with a corporeal torso rising up out of it. And atop that torso was a head that saw Jimmy. Great, Jimmy thought. Now I need to run. And even though it sounded sarcastic, it was actually sincere. It was great for him. He liked running, and so the monster gave chase. Jimmy's feet pounded the floor beneath him. Somehow that inability to run that afflicts most people in nightmares wasn't a problem for Jimmy. His feet moved fine, his body kept momentum, and he never suddenly found himself tripped up on the floor. He simply ran, heart pounding. His subconscious threw obstacles in his way. A chair here, a beam there, and an occasional child playing in the middle of the floor. The child would be fine, no need to save her. The monster wanted Jimmy. As Jimmy weaved through the obstacles, the glimpse that Jimmy had caught of the monster crystallized in his mind's eye. It was a thick black mist that supported a sickly gray torso. It was a strong upper body with clear abs and pecs, and broad shoulders sprouted into broad arms. The hands were 2 fat fingers with stubby claws about 2 inches thick, and matching opposable thumbs. The head had bull horns and large black eyes. Surprisingly, his mouth was small, about the size of a quarter, and it was rigid. The monster could neither open it further nor close it, always the size of a quarter. And since it was a dream, Jimmy knew how it worked. If the monster planted the mouth anywhere on Jimmy's body, it would all be over. The monster would suck all of Jimmy's insides out until only outsides were left. And then the monster would suck up the pile of outsides from the floor. Gross. Anyways, by this time Jimmy was no longer running through a hallway. The chairs and beams had turned into rocks and branches. Now Jimmy was in a forest. Not that that changed much. He ran for a long time, simply focusing on dodging obstacles. Then there was a cliff. Jimmy skidded to a halt. Jimmy looked over the edge. There was a massive drop onto slightly less massive rocks, but both were too massive for Jimmy. Jimmy looked to either side. There was nowhere to run. The part of the cliff that Jimmy stood on was a piece of land that jutted out into the sky. The cliff edge snaked back on either side just 45 degrees off from where the monster was. And sure enough, when Jimmy looked, there was a monster. The muscles around the monster's mouth and eyes formed an expression of delight. But the mouth was still a quarter-sized circle, and the eyes were still blank voids. But Jimmy could tell that the monster was happy. The monster glided nearer. Black mist and gray body cut off more and more of Jimmy's angle of escape. Jimmy sank to his knees. He had forgotten he was in a dream. Now he just saw impending death. Panic rushed through his mind. I don't want to die, he thought. I have so much to live for. But then suddenly his self-loathing washed over him. I don't really want to live, he thought. And he simply closed his eyes and waited for a quarter-sized mouth. After a minute, Jimmy heard a dull thunk. I was curious. Jimmy wasn't expecting a sound like that. He opened his eyes to see what the monster was doing, but the monster wasn't there. Instead, there was a shepherd with a staff. Jimmy was confused. Are you okay? The shepherd asked. Jimmy looked away. Yeah, you saved my life. Thanks. The shepherd said, That's true, but that's not exactly what I asked. Are you okay? Jimmy didn't answer. He didn't know what he felt like, but he knew that he didn't feel like talking. The shepherd sat down next to him, and the two simply waited in silence. Now that the nightmare was safe again, Jimmy's horrors from the real world began to come back. He was failing English. Wait, seriously? That's not really a huge problem. Of course not, but sometimes small things can feel like big things. And for Jimmy, grades were really important. Having an F made him feel like garbage. Jimmy thought about opening up to the shepherd. He certainly seemed like a good listener so far, but he didn't quite see the point. Jimmy had opened up to a lot of people recently. He had told the story of why he was failing over and over again. Some people would believe him when he talked about how unfair the teacher was. And some people wouldn't. But it always ended the same. They would offer some words of affirmation and encouragement. Jimmy might feel better for a while, but he always eventually felt like garbage again. You know, because he was failing. And he couldn't shake it. No, he didn't want to talk about it again. It was pointless. But the shepherd just waited. It was a little awkward for Jimmy. That actually puzzled Jimmy. What was the shepherd there for? And this, quite abruptly, is actually where we leave Jimmy. Mostly because this is getting much too long for a vlog. But that's okay. As an epilogue, Jimmy woke up in the morning and his problems were still there. But he also had a lot to think about. He still had a lot of healing to do. But he was already starting to think, maybe, just maybe, his value wasn't dependent on his failing English class. Did that solve everything? No. From there, he began to think about, where does his value really lie? But that's another story, so the end. Okay guys, I hope you liked the story. It was definitely rushed at the end. I confess, I ran out of time and out of steam. But let me know what you think of this video. I'm not sure yet as I record this if short stories work on a YouTube channel. I will probably discover a lot of things need to be tweaked, and certainly I should finish writing a short story before I upload it onto the internet. But as always, you're intensely patient with me and I thank you for that. If you have any feedback, let me know. Also, please leave a like and subscribe. And most importantly, have an awesome week. I will see you next Wednesday. God bless and ciao.